Part 1. The ship rocked slightly as it passed through the outer rings of Zeta 7, a massive space station that floated silently in the void. It wasn't beautiful, not by any stretch of the imagination. The prison facility was an ugly patchwork of metal plates and glowing energy conduits, its jagged edges giving it the appearance of something half-built and abandoned. But it wasn't abandoned. Far from it. Inside those cold, lifeless walls lived some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. Ryan Carter sat quietly in the transport shuttle, his hands cuffed to a metal bar bolted into the floor. He didn't look up when the guards muttered among themselves, or when the engines hummed louder as they approached the docking bay. His eyes were fixed on the floor, staring at nothing in particular. The cuffs chafed against his wrists, but he didn't complain. Complaints wouldn't change anything here. He wasn't like the others on this ride. Most of them were alien, with scales, fur, or even translucent skin that glowed faintly under the dim lights of the shuttle. Some had too many limbs, others had none at all. They snarled, hissed, or clicked their mandibles together, making strange noises Ryan couldn't understand. A few glanced at him occasionally, sneering or laughing in ways that made it clear they thought little of him, and why wouldn't they? He was human, after all, a species viewed by many as weak, fragile, and insignificant compared to the towering monstrosities around him. When the shuttle finally docked, the doors hissed open, and the prisoners were herded out one by one. Ryan followed without resistance, keeping his head down and his movements slow. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. Not yet, not ever, if he could help it. The intake process was mechanical and impersonal. Guards scanned each prisoner's body for weapons, implants, or anything else that might pose a threat. They checked IDs, logged serial numbers, and handed out uniforms. When it was Ryan's turn, the guard barely looked at him. "Another human," the alien said, in a guttural voice, its tone dripping with disdain. "What did you do? Steal someone's lunch?" Ryan didn't respond. He just stood there, letting them strip him of his old clothes and replace them with the drab gray jumpsuit every inmate wore. The number stenciled on the back read, 4729, a meaningless string of digits meant to erase whatever identity he'd once had. By the time they finished processing him, Ryan felt more like a number than a person. That was fine with him. Numbers didn't attract trouble. Afterward, he was led to the main cell block, a sprawling chamber filled with rows of bunks, tables, and benches. The air smelled stale, tinged with sweat and something metallic that clung to the back of his throat. Inmates milled about, talking, arguing, or simply watching newcomers with predatory interest. Ryan kept his gaze lowered, avoiding eye contact. He knew better than to challenge anyone not here, not now. It didn't take long for him to become a target. One of the first to notice him was Kralok, a hulking reptilian creature with thick, armored scales covering his body. Kralok towered over everyone else, his muscular frame rippling with every step. His eyes narrowed as they landed on Ryan, who was standing near the entrance, waiting for instructions from the guards. Well, Kralok rumbled, his deep voice carrying across the room. "Look what we've got here. Another squishy little human?" A few nearby inmates chuckled, turning to see what Kralok was talking about. Ryan didn't react. He stayed perfectly still, his expression blank. This only seemed to amuse Kralok further. "What's wrong, human?" the reptile taunted, taking a step closer. "Cat got your tongue. Or are you just scared?" Still, Ryan said nothing. He knew how these things worked. Responding would only make it worse. If Kralok wanted to pick a fight, Ryan wouldn't give him the satisfaction of rising to the bait. Better to stay quiet and let the moment pass. But Kralok wasn't satisfied. He circled Ryan slowly, inspecting him like a predator sizing up its prey. "You're smaller than I expected," he sneered. "I thought humans were supposed to be tough. Guess I was wrong." One of Kralok's cronies, a wiry alien with 6 spindly arms snickered behind him. Maybe he's hiding his strength, the creature suggested. Or maybe he's just useless. Useless sounds right, Kralik replied, grinning. Then, without warning, he shoved Ryan hard enough to send him stumbling backward. The impact knocked the wind out of him, but Ryan managed to catch himself before he fell. He straightened up slowly, his face still expressionless. "Come on, human," Kralik barked, flexing his claws. "Fight back. Show me what you're made of." Ryan didn't move. He simply stood there, breathing evenly, his posture relaxed. To anyone watching, he looked completely unbothered by the aggression directed at him. But inside, his mind was working furiously. He catalogued every detail about Kralik, the way he moved, the subtle shifts in his weight, the slight hesitation before each attack. Ryan wasn't afraid. He was calculating. Kral okay, growled in frustration. "No fight in you, huh? Fine, we'll fix that later." With a final sneer, he turned away, leaving Ryan to collect himself. The crowd dispersed, losing interest now that the spectacle was over. For the rest of the day, Ryan kept to himself, finding an empty corner where he could sit unnoticed. He ate his meager meal ration in silence, ignoring the occasional jeers thrown his way. Despite the hostility surrounding him, Ryan remained calm. He knew patience was key. These creatures saw him as weak because he refused to retaliate. They didn't know the truth, that beneath his quiet exterior lay a mind sharper than any blade, honed by years of survival in the harshest corners of the galaxy. They didn't know that the man they called 4729 was once feared by kings and warlords alike, and they certainly didn't know that Ryan Carter hadn't come to Zato 7 to cause trouble. He'd come to disappear, but disappearing wasn't going to be easy, not with Kralik and the others watching him so closely. Sooner or later, Ryan would have to show them exactly who he was. Until then, he would wait, and watch, and plan. Part 6. The days turned into a blur of careful planning and cautious movements. Ryan and Lyra worked in silence, exchanging minimal words, but understanding each other perfectly. They didn't meet openly. Instead, they passed messages through subtle gestures or brief encounters in crowded areas. Every detail mattered, every whispered word, every glance, every step. The stakes were too high to leave anything to chance. Ryan spent hours studying the prison's layout, memorizing the guards' patrol routes, and noting the positions of cameras. He observed the behavior of other inmates, identifying those who might pose a threat or an opportunity. His mind became a map, charting paths and possibilities with precision. Escape wasn't just about finding a way out. It was about timing, coordination, and exploiting weaknesses in the system. Lyra proved invaluable in her own way. Her connections within the prison gave her access to information Ryan couldn't gather on his own. She spoke quietly to certain inmates, testing their loyalty and gauging their willingness to help. Some dismissed her outright, unwilling to risk their lives for a vague promise of freedom. Others listened, intrigued by the idea of breaking free from Zeta 7. Among them was Jox, a disgraced former guard who had been imprisoned for stealing supplies. Jox knew the facility better than most, and his knowledge could be the key to navigating its labyrinthine corridors. One evening, during recreation hour, Ryan approached Jox cautiously. The man sat alone near the far wall, his face lined with scars and regret. He looked up as Ryan approached, his expression wary but not hostile. "What do you want?" Jox asked, his voice low and gravelly. "To talk," Ryan replied, sitting down across from him. "About getting out." Jox snorted. "You think that's possible?" "No one escapes Zeta 7. Not yet," Ryan said calmly. "But I'm working on it." Jox studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I don't have a choice," Ryan replied, "and neither do you." That caught Jox's attention. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "What's your plan?" Ryan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Trust was fragile, especially here. There's a maintenance tunnel. If we can find it and disable the security systems, we might have a shot. Jocks frowned. If it exists, Threx will know about it. And even if he doesn't, the tunnel will be rigged with traps. I know, Ryan admitted. But I also know how to handle traps. What I don't know is how to get past the guards without being noticed. Jocks nodded slowly, considering the offer. Finally, he sighed. All right, I'll help. But if this goes south, I'm not taking the fall for you. Fair enough, Ryan said. Just tell me what you know. Over the next hour, Jocks shared what he'd learned about the prison's infrastructure. The maintenance tunnel was real, though few people knew about it. It led to an external docking bay used for transporting supplies, which meant there might be ships available if they could reach them in time. But the tunnel was heavily monitored, and the security systems were designed to detect even the slightest disturbance. We'll need someone to hack the controls, Jocks warned. Otherwise, we're dead before we take 10 steps. Ryan nodded. I've got someone in mind. That night, Ryan met with Lyra again. She listened intently as he explained the plan, her glowing eyes reflecting determination. When he mentioned the need for a hacker, she smiled faintly. I know just the person, she said. Ziv. He's small, quiet, and smarter than anyone gives him credit for. Can he be trusted? Ryan asked. He hates Threx more than any of us, Lyra replied. That's all the motivation he needs. The following day, Ryan arranged a meeting with Civ. The alien was diminutive, with pale skin and oversized eyes that darted nervously around the room. He flinched when Ryan approached, clearly unused to direct interaction. You're Ziv? Ryan asked softly, keeping his tone non-threatening. Yes, Ziv squeaked, clutching a small device in his hands. What do you want? To get out of here, Ryan said. And I hear you're good with technology. Ziv hesitated, glancing at Lyra for reassurance. She nodded encouragingly, and he relaxed slightly. I am, he admitted. But hacking the security systems won't be easy. They're tied directly to Threx's command center. I know, Ryan replied. But you're our best shot. Can you do it? Ziv thought for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. I'll try. But if I fail, we all fail, Ryan finished. So make sure you succeed. With Ziv on board, the team began finalizing their strategy. Each member had a role to play. Jocks would guide them through the tunnels, using his knowledge of the facility to avoid detection. Ziv would handle the security systems, disabling cameras and alarms long enough for them to pass unnoticed. Lyra would act as a scout, gathering intelligence and keeping watch for potential threats. And Ryan would lead the operation, making split-second decisions and ensuring everyone stayed alive. As the pieces fell into place, Ryan felt a flicker of hope, a rare sensation these days. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine life beyond Zeta 7. Freedom wasn't guaranteed, but it was worth fighting for. The morning of the escape arrived sooner than expected. Tensions in the cell block had reached a boiling point, with fights breaking out between rival factions. Krelok's followers grew bolder, clashing with Vex's group over territory and resources. The chaos provided the perfect cover for Ryan and his team, allowing them to move without drawing attention. They gathered in a secluded corner of the common area, speaking in hushed tones. This is it, Ryan said, looking at each of them in turn. Once we start, there's no turning back. No one argued. They understood the risks and accepted them willingly. Together, they slipped away from the crowd, heading toward the maintenance tunnel. The entrance was hidden behind a false panel in the wall, cleverly disguised to look like part of the structure. Jocks knelt down, prying it open with a piece of scrap metal. Inside, the tunnel stretched into darkness, its narrow passage illuminated only by dim emergency lights. "Stay close," Jox whispered, leading the way. The air smelled damp and metallic, and the sound of their footsteps echoed eerily against the walls. Ziv followed closely behind, clutching his device tightly. His fingers moved quickly over the screen, bypassing locks and disabling sensors as they went. Lyra brought up the rear, her glowing eyes scanning the shadows for signs of danger. For a while, everything went smoothly. The tunnel was empty, the security systems disabled, but as they neared the halfway point, Ryan heard something, faint hum, growing louder with each passing second. "Trouble," he muttered, stopping abruptly. "What is it?" Lyra asked, her voice tense. "Drones," Ryan replied. "Threx must have sent them after us." Sure enough, moments later, a pair of surveillance drones appeared around the bend, their red sensors glowing ominously. Ryan cursed under his breath. Drones weren't supposed to patrol the tunnels, they were meant for the main corridors. Someone had tipped off Threx. "We need to move," Jox urged. "Now." Ryan nodded, pulling out the shard of metal Lyra had given him earlier. "Ziv, can you disable them?" Ziv shook his head frantically. "Not fast enough. They're programmed to attack on sight." "Then we fight," Ryan said firmly. He stepped forward, positioning himself between the drones and the others. "Get ready." The first drone lunged at him, its mechanical limbs snapping shut like jaws. Ryan sidestepped, driving the shard into its side. Sparks flew as the machine faltered, collapsing to the ground. The second drone hesitated, recalculating its approach. Ryan didn't give it time to recover. With a swift motion, he hurled the shard like a dagger, striking the drone's sensor array. It sputtered and fell silent. "Go," Ryan shouted, gesturing for the others to continue. They ran, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor. Behind them, alarms began blaring, signaling their presence to the entire facility. Time was running out. When they finally reached the docking bay, relief washed over them at least, until they saw the guards stationed outside the ships. Armed and alert, they blocked the only path to freedom. Ryan clenched his fists, his mind racing. This wasn't part of the plan, but plans, he reminded himself, were meant to adapt. "Follow my lead," he said quietly, stepping forward. Part 2. The next morning, Ryan woke up before the others. The cell block was still dimly lit, the faint hum of machinery filling the air. Most of the inmates were sprawled out on their bunks, snoring or muttering in their sleep. A few early risers shuffled around, groggy and disoriented, but no one paid much attention to Ryan as he sat up and stretched. He moved quietly, careful not to make any noise that might draw unwanted eyes. Breakfast was served shortly after sunrise, or what passed for sunrise aboard Zeta 7. The guards pushed a cart loaded with trays of food into the center of the room, and the prisoners swarmed it like animals fighting over scraps. Ryan hung back, letting the chaos unfold without him. He didn't care about being first in line. In fact, he preferred staying out of the way. It gave him time to observe. As he watched, he noticed patterns. Some inmates bullied their way to the front, shoving smaller aliens aside to grab the best portions. Others formed small groups, sticking close together for protection. Krayluck, predictably, was at the heart of the commotion. His size alone was enough to intimidate anyone who got too close, and he wasted no time claiming the largest share of food for himself and his cronies. When the crowd finally thinned out, Ryan stepped forward to claim his tray. By then, the pickings were slim, a lump of gray paste that smelled vaguely of burnt metal, a piece of hard bread, and a cup of water. It wasn't much, but Ryan didn't complain. He found an empty corner and sat down, eating slowly and deliberately. Every bite was methodical, every sip measured. Even something as simple as eating became part of his routine, a way to maintain control over his environment. But peace, if it could even be called that, didn't last long. As Ryan ate, he felt a shadow loom over him. Looking up, he saw standing there, flanked by two of his lackeys. The reptilian brute grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Morning, human," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Sleep well?" Ryan didn't answer. He just kept chewing, his movements steady and unhurried. To anyone else, it might have looked like cowardice, but Kralok's grin faltered slightly. There was something unsettling about the way Ryan ignored him, as if he didn't exist. "Hey," Kralok snapped, kicking the tray out of Ryan's hands. The food spilled onto the floor, leaving a mess of gray paste and crumbs. "I'm talking to you." The other inmates nearby stopped what they were doing to watch. Some smirked, amused by the spectacle. Others looked uneasy, sensing the tension building between the two. Ryan remained seated, his expression calm and unreadable. He glanced at the spilled food, then back at Kralok, who was now towering over him. "What's the matter?" Kralok taunted. "Too scared to say anything? Or are you just dumb?" Still, Ryan didn't respond. He reached down, picked up the tray, and set it aside. Then he stood up slowly, brushing imaginary dust off his jumpsuit. For a moment, the two of them locked eyes. Kralok's gaze was filled with anger and contempt, while Ryan's was cold and calculating. It was like staring into a mirror, reflecting everything Kralok wasn't. "You think you're tough, don't you?" Kralok growled, leaning in closer. "Standing there all quiet like it makes you better than us?" Ryan tilted his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't a nod, but it wasn't a denial either. The gesture seemed to infuriate Kralok even more. "I don't like your attitude," human Kralok spat. "Maybe I should teach you some respect." He raised a clawed hand, ready to strike. The other inmates leaned in eagerly, anticipating the blow. But just as Kralok's fist started to descend, Ryan shifted his weight ever so slightly. It was a subtle movement, almost unnoticeable, but it changed the dynamic entirely. Instead of hitting its mark, Kralok's punch grazed past Ryan's shoulder, throwing the reptile slightly off balance. Kralok stumbled, caught off guard by the miss. His cronies snickered nervously, unsure whether to laugh or step in. Ryan, meanwhile, hadn't moved an inch. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed, his breathing steady. The entire exchange had taken less than a second, but it left a lasting impression. Kralok recovered quickly, his face twisting with rage. "You think that was funny, huh?" he roared, grabbing Ryan by the collar. "You're gonna regret messing with me." Ryan didn't struggle as Kralok lifted him off the ground. He didn't plead or beg for mercy either. He just stared at the reptile, his eyes devoid of fear. It was as though he knew something Kralok didn't, something that made the threat meaningless. "Put him down." "Kralok," a voice called out. From behind them, both Ryan and Kralok turned to see Lyra approaching. She was a slender alien with smooth, pale skin that shimmered faintly in the light. Her large almond-shaped eyes glowed softly, giving her an ethereal appearance. Unlike many of the other inmates, she carried herself with grace and confidence. Kralok scowled. "Stay out of this, Lyra. This doesn't concern you." "It does now," Lyra replied calmly, her tone firm but not confrontational. "You're making a scene. Do you really want the guards to notice?" Kralok hesitated, glancing toward the nearest guard station. Sure enough, one of the officers was watching them curiously, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. Grumbling under his breath, Kralok dropped Ryan back onto the floor. "This isn't over," he muttered, before storming off, his cronies trailing behind him. Lyra waited until they were gone before turning to Ryan. "You handled that well," she said, studying him with interest. "Most people would have panicked." Ryan shrugged, brushing himself off. "Panicking doesn't solve anything." "No, it doesn't," Lyra agreed. "But neither does provoking someone like Kralok. Why do you let him push you around?" "I don't," Ryan replied simply. "He pushes himself." Lyra raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You're smarter than you look." "Thanks," Ryan said dryly. For a moment, they stood in silence, sizing each other up. Lyra was different from the other inmates. She didn't seem interested in bullying or causing trouble. If anything, she appeared curious, almost protective. Ryan wasn't sure what to make of her, but he decided to keep an open mind. "If you need help," Lyra said finally, "let me know. I've been here longer than you. I can show you how things work." Ryan nodded. "I'll remember that." With that, Lyra turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Ryan watched her go, his thoughts racing. He didn't trust Izzy not anymore, but he couldn't deny that Lyra had potential. Whether she became an ally or a liability remained to be seen. Later that day, during recreation hour, Ryan found himself sitting alone again. The other inmates avoided him for the most part, wary of crossing Krolak, but Ryan didn't mind the solitude. It gave him time to think, to plan. He studied the layout of the cell block, noting the positions of the guards, the locations of cameras, and the behavior of the other prisoners. Every detail mattered. As the hours passed, he began to piece together a mental map of Zeta 7. Escape wasn't his immediate goal. He'd come here willingly. After Albet's survival was, and survival meant understanding the rules, both written and unwritten. By the time the lights dimmed for the night, Ryan had settled into a rhythm. He lay on his bunk, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the prison fading into silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats. But Ryan wasn't worried. He'd faced worse before, much worse, and deep down, he knew one thing for certain. Krolak and the others had no idea who they were dealing with. Part 3. The prison was quiet at night, or as quiet as a place like Zeta 7 could ever be. The hum of machinery never stopped, and the occasional groan of metal echoed through the corridors like a ghost wandering aimlessly. Ryan lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. His mind was active, though his body remained still. He replayed the events of the day in his head, analyzing every detail: the way Krolak moved, the tone of Lyra's voice, the subtle glances exchanged between inmates. Everything told a story if you knew how to read it. But tonight, Ryan's thoughts drifted elsewhere. Memories surfaced, unbidden but clear, pulling him back to a time before Zeta 7, before he became prisoner 4729. Back when he was someone else entirely. Years ago, Ryan Carter had been known by another name, Shadow. It wasn't a title he chose for himself, but one given to him by those who feared him. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where laws were suggestions and power was currency, Shadowhawk ruled. He was a mercenary, a hired killer, but not just any mercenary. Where others relied on brute force or flashy weapons, Shadowhawk depended on precision and strategy. He didn't just take lives. He dismantled empires, toppled regimes, and left chaos in his wake. His reputation grew with each mission. Some called him a monster. Others considered him a savior. Most simply stayed out of his way. Shadowhawk didn't care what people thought. All that mattered was the job and the credits that came with it. But then came the final mission. A high-profile target. A warlord whose reach extended across star systems. The job itself wasn't unusual. What made it different was the aftermath. For the first time, Shadowhawk hesitated. Not because of guilt, he'd long since buried whatever conscience he once had, but because of something deeper. A sense of emptiness. No matter how many enemies he eliminated, no matter how much money he earned, nothing filled the void inside him. So, after completing the mission, he did something unexpected. He walked away. Not just from the job, but from everything he faked. His death erased all traces of Shadowhawk and disappeared into obscurity. Ryan Carter was born a man with no past, no connections, no ambitions beyond staying alive and staying hidden. And yet, here he was now, locked in an alien prison, surrounded by creatures who saw him as weak and insignificant. Irony had a cruel sense of humor. Ryan snapped out of his reverie when he heard movement nearby. Someone was pacing back and forth in the shadows, their footsteps soft but deliberate. He didn't need to look to know it was Krolak. The reptilian brute couldn't sleep. either probably too angry about their earlier encounter. Ryan closed his eyes, feigning rest, while keeping his senses sharp. He didn't trust Krolok to leave him alone, even in the dark. Sure enough, moments later, he felt a presence looming over him. Krolok's breath was hot and rancid, carrying the faint scent of spoiled meat. "Still awake, human?" the alien whispered, his voice low but laced with menace. "Good. I wanted to talk." Ryan opened his eyes slowly, meeting Krolok's gaze without flinching. "Talk about what?" "About your attitude," Krolok growled. "You think you're clever, don't you? Acting all calm and quiet like you're better than us?" "I'm not trying to be better," Ryan replied evenly. "I'm just trying to survive." Krolok snorted. "Survive? You call this surviving? Letting everyone walk all over you. That's not survival, that's weakness." "Maybe," Ryan said with a shrug. "Or maybe it's smarter than picking fights I don't need." Krolok's eyes narrowed. "You're testing my patience, human. And let me tell you something, when I lose my patience, bad things happen." Ryan didn't respond. He simply stared at Krolok, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Finally Krolok backed away, muttering under his breath. "You'll see," he said before disappearing into the darkness. Ryan exhaled slowly, his muscles relaxing. He hadn't expected Krolok to attack, not here. Not now, but the confrontation reminded him of one important truth. Predators always tested their prey. They pushed boundaries, searching for weaknesses. If Ryan showed even a hint of fear or hesitation, Krolok would pounce. But Ryan wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. Instead, he focused on what mattered most: preparation. Every interaction, every insult, every threat, it was data. Information he could use when the time came. Because sooner or later, Krolok would make a mistake. And when he did, Ryan would be ready. The next morning brought a new challenge. During breakfast, a group of inmates cornered Ryan near the food line. They weren't Krolok's cronies, at least not directly, but they clearly shared his disdain for humans. One of them, a wiry alien with glowing green eyes, sneered as he stepped forward. "Hey, Squishy," he said, shoving Ryan slightly. "Where's your backbone?" Ryan steadied himself, his movements smooth and controlled. "I don't have one," he replied calmly. "It makes running easier." The comment caught the aliens off guard. For a moment, they looked confused, unsure whether to laugh or get angry. Then the leader of the group, a bulky creature with 4 arms, snarled, "You think you're funny, huh? Maybe we should teach you some manners." Ryan glanced around, noting the positions of the guards and the other prisoners. None of them seemed eager to intervene. This was going to escalate quickly unless he found a way to defuse it. "I don't want trouble," Ryan said, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Just let me eat, and I'll stay out of your way." The 4-armed alien smirked. "Too late for that. You've been in our way since you got here." Before Ryan could respond, one of the aliens lunged at him, claws extended. But instead of dodging or fighting back, Ryan sidestepped at the last second, letting the attacker stumble past him. The move surprised everyone, including the attacker, who crashed into a nearby table. The sound drew attention from the other inmates, who began cheering and jeering. "What are you doing, human?" the leader shouted, charging toward Ryan. "Fight back." Ryan didn't comply. He continued moving, using the chaos to his advantage. When one alien swung at him, he ducked. When another tried to grab him, he twisted free. It wasn't fighting, it was evasion, and it infuriated the attackers even more. Finally, the leader managed to land a blow, striking Ryan across the chest. The impact knocked him backward, but he recovered quickly, rolling to his feet. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not pain, but irritation. Enough was enough. With a sudden burst of speed, Ryan closed the distance between himself and the leader. Before the alien could react, Ryan drove his elbow into the creature's throat, cutting off its air supply. The alien gasped, clutching at its neck as it collapsed to the ground. The other attackers froze, stunned by the sudden shift in momentum. Ryan straightened up, his breathing steady. "I said I don't want trouble," he repeated, his voice cold and firm. "But if you keep pushing, I'll give you exactly what you're asking for." The remaining aliens hesitated, glancing at each other uncertainly. Then, without another word, they backed away, dragging their injured leader with them. The crowd dispersed, murmuring among themselves. Ryan stood there for a moment longer, watching them retreat, before turning and walking away. Lyra appeared beside him a few minutes later, her expression unreadable. "That was impressive," she said quietly. "You held back until the last possible moment." "Why?" "Because violence draws attention," Ryan replied. "And attention is dangerous." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" "Not really," Ryan said. "I just know how to pick my battles." As they parted ways, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that his days of blending in were coming to an end. The inmates were starting to notice him now, and not just Kralik. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with suspicion. Either way, staying hidden was becoming harder. But Ryan wasn't worried. He'd spent years perfecting the art of survival, and if the galaxy's deadliest mercenary had to reveal himself to stay alive, so be it. Part 4. The days that followed were tense. Ryan could feel the atmosphere in the cell block shifting. Word of his confrontation with the group of aliens had spread quickly, and now everyone seemed to be watching him more closely. Some inmates gave him wary glances, as if they weren't sure whether to fear or respect him. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about what kind of man or creature he really was. Even Kralik kept his distance for a while, though. Ryan knew it wouldn't last long. Still, Ryan did his best to stay out of trouble. He went about his routine, eating meals, exercising during recreation hours, and observing everything around him. But no matter how hard he tried to blend in, the attention was unavoidable. It wasn't just the inmates either. The guards began paying closer attention to him too, their eyes lingering on him whenever they passed by. Ryan didn't like it. Attention meant scrutiny, and scrutiny could lead to discovery. If anyone figured out who he really was, his carefully constructed cover would crumble. One evening, as the lights dimmed for nighttime, Ryan sat alone near the far wall of the cell block. He leaned against the cold metal surface, his arms resting loosely on his knees. His face was calm, but his mind was racing. He replayed every interaction he'd had since arriving at Set-27, searching for mistakes. Had he said too much? Moved too fast? Let his guard down even slightly? He was so lost in thought that he didn't notice Lyra approaching until she spoke. "You're thinking again?" she said softly, sitting down beside him. Ryan glanced at her, then back at the floor. "What else is there to do?" Lyra tilted her head, studying him. Her glowing eyes reflected faintly in the dim light. "Most people here try not to think too much. Thinking leads to plans, and plans get you killed." "Not always," Ryan replied. "Sometimes plans keep you alive." She smiled faintly. "True, but most people here aren't like you." "No," Ryan agreed. "They're not." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it felt natural, almost companionable. Lyra had a way of making Ryan lower his defenses, even if only a little. She didn't push him for answers or demand explanations. Instead, she simply observed, letting him decide how much to share. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Ryan hesitated. The question wasn't unexpected, but it still caught him off guard. He considered lying, brushing her off with some vague excuse. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the sincerity in her voice, or maybe it was the fact that he hadn't spoken honestly to anyone in years. "I'm hiding," he admitted after a pause. "From my past." Lyra nodded slowly, as if she'd suspected as much. "And does your past have a name, Ryan?" looked at her sharply, his instincts kicking in. Was this a trick? An attempt to dig up information she could use against him later? But her expression remained open, curious but not threatening. It did, he said cautiously, but I left it behind. Lyra didn't press further. Instead, she changed the subject. Kralok's been talking about you. That got Ryan's attention. What's he saying? That you're weak, Lyra replied. That you're lucky he hasn't crushed you yet. But, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Others are starting to doubt him. They saw what you did the other day. They know you're not as helpless as you seem. Ryan frowned. This wasn't good. Kralok's pride wouldn't let him ignore the growing whispers. Sooner or later, he'd come looking for another fight, and this time, he wouldn't stop until one of them was broken. He'll challenge me again, Ryan said quietly. It's only a matter of time. And when he does? Lyra asked. When? He does, Ryan replied, his voice firm. I'll handle it. 2 days later, Kralok made his move. It happened during recreation hour, when the inmates gathered in the common area to stretch their legs or vent their frustrations. Ryan was sitting on a bench, absently rolling a small piece of scrap metal between his fingers. He wasn't participating in any of the games or conversations happening around him. He never did. But that didn't mean he wasn't aware of them. Suddenly, the chatter died down. Ryan looked up to see Kralok standing a few feet away, flanked by his usual entourage. The reptilian brute's yellow eyes gleamed with malice as he stared down at Ryan. Get up, Kralok growled. Ryan didn't move right away. He took his time, setting the scrap metal aside before standing. His movements were deliberate, unhurried. He wasn't afraid of Kralok not anymore, but he understood the importance of appearances. Showing confidence without arrogance was key. What do you want? Ryan asked, keeping his tone neutral. Kralok smirked. I want you to fight me, right here, right now. No tricks, no running away, just you and me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Inmates began gathering round, forming a loose circle. Some looked eager for the spectacle, while others seemed uneasy. Fights in the prison weren't uncommon, but this was different. Everyone knew Kralok was strong, perhaps the strongest inmate in the cell block, and Ryan. Well, Ryan was supposed to be weak. That's what Kralok wanted to prove. Ryan glanced around, taking in the scene. The guards were watching from their posts, but they weren't intervening. Prison fights were tolerated as long as they didn't turn deadly. Still, Ryan knew better than to assume he'd walk away unscathed. Kralok wasn't fighting for dominance. He was fighting for humiliation. If Ryan lost, it wouldn't just hurt his body, it would destroy his reputation. You don't want to do this, Ryan said evenly. Kralok laughed. Oh, I think I do. Unless you're too scared. Ryan sighed. Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you. The crowd erupted into cheers and jeers as the two opponents squared off. Kralok cracked his knuckles, flexing his claws. He moved, with surprising agility for someone his size, circling Ryan with predatory grace. Ryan, meanwhile, stood still, his weight balanced evenly on both feet. His hands hung loosely at his sides, ready to act but not eager to strike. The first attack came fast. Kralok lunged forward, his claws aimed at Ryan's chest. But instead of dodging or blocking, Ryan stepped sideways at the last second, letting Kralok's momentum carry him past. The reptile stumbled slightly, caught off guard by the lack of resistance. What's the matter? Kralok snarled, spinning around, too scared to hit me. Ryan didn't answer. He just waited, his posture relaxed, but alert. When Kralok charged again, Ryan sidestepped once more, this time delivering a sharp kick to the back of the alien's knee. Kralok grunted, dropping briefly to one leg before recovering. The crowd grew louder, their excitement building. Kralok was angry now, his attacks becoming wilder and less controlled. Each time he swung, Ryan slipped away, landing quick jabs or strikes that barely registered but added up over time. It was a strategy designed to wear Krallick down to make him tire himself out before delivering the final blow. But Krolok wasn't giving up. With a roar of frustration, he launched himself at Ryan with everything he had. This time, Ryan didn't dodge. Instead, he dropped low, grabbing Krolok's arm and using the reptile's own force against him. With a twist of his body, Ryan flipped Krolok onto the ground, pinning him there with a knee pressed firmly against his chest. The room fell silent. For a moment, all that could be heard was Krolok's labored breathing as he struggled to free himself. Ryan leaned closer, his voice low but clear. "I told you not to do this." Then, without another word, he released Krolok and stepped back. The reptilian brute scrambled to his feet, his face twisted with rage and shame. But he didn't attack again. He couldn't. The truth was undeniable. Ryan had won. As the crowd dispersed, muttering among themselves, Lyra appeared beside Ryan. "That was impressive," she said quietly. "You didn't kill him." "No," Ryan replied. "I didn't need to." Lyra studied him for a moment, her glowing eyes thoughtful. "You're full of surprises." "So are you," Ryan said, glancing at her. "Why do you care so much?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe because I see a bit of myself in you. Someone trying to survive in a place where survival isn't easy." Ryan didn't respond. He just watched as Krolok slunk away, defeated but not forgotten. The battle might have been over, but the war was far from finished. Part 5. The aftermath of the fight spread through Zeta 7 like wildfire. Word traveled fast in a place where boredom was the only constant, and everyone had an opinion about what they'd seen. Some inmates whispered that Ryan was stronger than he looked, while others dismissed him as lucky or clever. Krolok's defeat didn't sit well with his followers, who muttered darkly about revenge. But for now, the reptilian brute kept his distance, nursing both his wounds and his pride. Ryan, meanwhile, returned to his usual routine. He didn't celebrate his victory or gloat over it. To him, the fight hadn't been personal, it was simply a problem that needed solving. Now that it was over, he focused on staying invisible, blending into the background as much as possible. But blending in was becoming harder. The other inmates watched him more closely now, their curiosity mingled with caution. Even the guards seemed to linger near him longer during inspections, their eyes scanning his face as if searching for something. Lyra continued to visit him when she could, though her appearances were sporadic. She never stayed long enough to draw suspicion, but each conversation left Ryan feeling slightly unsettled. There was something about her, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. She asked questions without prying, offered advice without demanding answers. It wasn't trust, exactly, but it was close. One evening, as the lights dimmed for nighttime, Lyra approached Ryan again. This time, she carried a small object in her hand, a shard of metal, sharp enough to cut skin. "Here," she said quietly, pressing it into his palm. "You might need this." Ryan frowned, closing his fingers around the makeshift blade. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you're not like the others," Lyra replied. Her voice was soft but firm. "And because I think we can help each other." Ryan studied her carefully, weighing her words. "What do you want?" "I want out," she said simply. "I've been here too long. If there's anyone who can find a way to escape, it's you." Ryan hesitated. Escape wasn't part of his plan. He'd come to Zeta 7 to disappear, to bury himself so deep that no one would ever find him again. But Lyra's offer planted a seed of doubt in his mind. Could he really stay hidden forever? Or was it only a matter of time before someone uncovered his secrets? Before he could respond, Lyra added, "Think about it. You don't have to decide now." She slipped away before Ryan could press her for details. He stared at the shard in his hand, its edges glinting faintly in the low light. It wasn't mucha. Crude tool easily overlooked, but it represented something bigger, a choice. Stay and risk exposure, or leave and risk everything else. Over the next few days, Ryan noticed subtle changes in the prison dynamics. Kralok's followers began acting bolder, testing boundaries, and looking for opportunities to assert dominance. They didn't confront Ryan directly, not yet, but their aggression spilled over onto weaker inmates, creating tension throughout the cell block. The guards cracked down harder than usual, issuing punishments for even minor infractions. It was clear that chaos was brewing, and Ryan knew it was only a matter of time before it reached a breaking point. During recreation hour, Ryan observed the shifting alliances among the prisoners. Vexa, the insectoid strategist, had started gathering support from smaller groups, promising protection in exchange for loyalty. Rinner, the telepathic energy manipulator, remained aloof, watching silently from the sidelines. Both were dangerous, in their own ways, but neither posed an immediate threat. For now, Kralok's faction was the biggest concern. As Ryan sat alone near the corner of the common area, Lyra joined him once again. "Things are changing," she said, her tone serious. "Kralok isn't done with you." "I know," Ryan replied. "But he's not my biggest worry." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Who is?" "The warden," Ryan said. "Threx. He's been watching us more closely lately. I think he suspects something." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "Threx doesn't miss much. If he starts digging into your past, he won't like what he finds," Ryan finished. "Which is why I need to be careful." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of machinery and the distant chatter of inmates. Then Lyra leaned closer, lowering her voice. "There's a rumor going around about a maintenance tunnel that leads outside the main cell block. No one knows if it's real, but if it is, it's probably guarded," Ryan interrupted, "and rigged with traps." "Of course," Lyra agreed, "but it's still worth looking into. If we can find it and disable the security systems, we might have a chance." Ryan didn't answer right away. His mind raced, calculating risks and possibilities. The idea of escaping Zeta-7 was tempting, but it came with complications. For one thing, he didn't fully trust Lyra. She seemed sincere, but sincerity didn't always mean reliability. And even if she was trustworthy, getting out wouldn't solve all his problems. Once he left the prison, he'd be exposed to whoever might still be hunting him. Still, Lyra had a point. Staying in Zeta-7 wasn't a long-term solution. Sooner or later, someone would figure out who he really was, and when that happened, hiding wouldn't be an option anymore. "Let me think about it," Ryan said finally. "If we're going to do this, we'll need a plan, a good one." Lyra smiled faintly. "I thought you'd say that." Later that night, Ryan lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts churned, replaying conversations and analyzing details. The shard of metal Lyra had given him rested under his pillow, a reminder of the decision ahead. Escape wasn't just about leaving Zeta-7, it was about survival, and survival meant adapting, no matter the cost. As he drifted off to sleep, Ryan's mind wandered back to his past. Memories surfaced unbidden, fragments of missions and battles long since buried. He saw faces, some familiar, others forgotten, and heard voices echoing in the recesses of his mind. Shadowhawk, the name lingered like a ghost, haunting him even in his dreams. When morning came, Ryan woke with a sense of clarity. The choice was clear now. Staying hidden wasn't enough. If he wanted to survive, he needed to take control of his situation, and that meant finding a way out of Zeta-7. He found Lyra during breakfast, sitting alone near the edge of the dining area. She looked up as he approached, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Have you decided?" she asked. Ryan nodded. "We'll need allies," he said. "People we can trust." Lyra smiled faintly. "I know a few." "Good," Ryan replied, "because we're going to need all the help we can get." Together, they began laying the groundwork for their plan. Ryan used his observations of the prison layout to identify potential routes and weak points. Lyra gathered information from other inmates, piecing together rumors and half-truths about the maintenance tunnel. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, fragile web of possibilities held together by determination and desperation. But as they worked, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Someone or something was watching them. Whether it was Threx or one of the other inmates, he couldn't tell. All he knew was that time was running out, and when the moment came, they'd need to act quickly, or not at all.